Story 1. The New Year's Invitation. It was my first winter break after starting college, and I was back home for the holidays. Dorm life had changed me. I drank more and had grown used to nights of recklessness. My two closest friends, Mark and Tony, came over that New Year's Eve to kick off what we hoped would be an unforgettable night. We were armed with drinks and buzzing with excitement as we decided where to head. Mark, scrolling through his phone, suddenly grinned. "All right, listen to this. I've been chatting with this girl, Emily. She invited me to a party tonight. It's apparently some exclusive underground spot." Tony smirked. "A Tinder match? Let me guess, she's different." He leaned over to look at her profile. "Wait, this is the girl? Are we sure she's even real?" Mark shot him a glare. "Yes. She's real. Look, she said we can all come. It's gonna be great. The address is here." He held up his phone, showing an unfamiliar location on the outskirts of town. I frowned. A party in the middle of nowhere? Sounds sketchy. Mark shrugged. "She says it's a private venue. Come on, guys. What's the worst that could happen?" Reluctantly, we agreed. After all, we were young and looking for adventure, or so we thought. We called an Uber, and as we climbed in, the driver hesitated when Mark gave him the address. "That's an odd place for a party," he muttered. None of us replied. The building we arrived at was an old, decrepit warehouse. The windows were boarded up, and the only light came from a flickering bulb above a rusted door. A tall man in a black hoodie leaned against the wall, staring at us as we approached. "This is it?" Tony asked, glancing around nervously. Mark checked his phone and read the text Emily had just sent, "Come inside. It's starting." Without hesitation, he began walking toward the door. Tony and I exchanged uneasy looks but followed. The man at the door didn't speak. He simply pushed it open and gestured for us to enter. Inside, the music was strange, a low, pulsing beat that seemed to vibrate in my chest. The room was dark, lit only by erratic strobe lights. Around 20 or 30 people were scattered throughout, standing in groups or sitting alone in the shadows. Their faces were obscured by the dim light, but their eyes glinted as they watched us. No one spoke. "This doesn't feel right," I whispered. Tony nodded. "Where are the girls? This is supposed to be a party, right?" Mark looked uneasy now. "Let me text Emily again," he said, pulling out his phone. Moments later, a reply came, "I'm in the back. Past the black doors. Hurry, it's almost time." "What does that mean?" I asked. Mark hesitated. "Let's just find her and see. If it's weird, we'll leave." We followed him toward a set of heavy black doors at the far end of the room. They groaned as Mark pushed them open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The air was colder here, carrying a metallic scent that made my stomach churn. Doors lined the walls, each one shut tight. Bare bulbs cast flickering light, creating long, shifting shadows. "This is officially creepy," Tony muttered. Mark glanced at his phone again. "She said she's at the end of the hall." As we walked, one of the side doors creaked open. A pale-faced man in a dark suit stepped out. His eyes locked onto Mark as he leaned close and whispered something into his ear. Mark froze, his face going pale. "What did he say?" I asked. Mark shook his head. "We need to leave. Now." "Why? What's going on?" Tony pressed. "I said we're leaving." Mark snapped, his voice trembling. He turned and started walking quickly back toward the black doors. Tony and I hurried after him, exchanging nervous glances. When we re-entered the main room, the music had stopped. The people who had been standing idly before were now facing us, their expressions unreadable in the strobe light. The silence was oppressive. "Why did the music stop?" Tony whispered. "Don't look at them," Mark muttered. "Just keep moving." We reached the entrance, but the tall man who had let us in now stood in the doorway, blocking our path. His eyes bored into us, and his lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile. "Excuse us," I said, trying to sound calm. The man didn't move. Behind us, I heard the black doors creak open. Footsteps echoed through the room. Heavy and deliberate. Mark's voice was barely audible. "Run." Then louder, "Run." We bolted. Chairs toppled as people lunged at us, their movements unnatural, almost inhuman. The tall man reached for me, but I ducked under his arm and crashed into Tony as we stumbled out the door. We didn't stop running until we were halfway down the street, gasping for breath. "What the hell just happened?" Tony demanded. Mark finally spoke, his voice trembling. "That guy in the hallway," he whispered, "get out before midnight. They're sealing the doors." "What does that even mean?" Tony asked. Mark shook his head. "I don't know. But Emily doesn't exist. It was all a setup. For what, I don't want to know." The next morning, we called the police anonymously, reporting the warehouse. But when we searched for news about the place, raids, arrests, anything, there was nothing. The building didn't even exist on the city's records. Mark never used dating apps again. As for me, I still wonder what was behind those black doors. What would have happened if we hadn't run? Whatever it was, I'm glad we never found out. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Story 2. The Whispering Shadows. When I was 13, I stayed over at my cousin Daniel's house for New Year's Eve. His parents had gone to visit a friend in the city, leaving us in the care of the housekeeper, Mrs. Thorne. The house was an ancient Victorian mansion, crumbling with age and draped in ivy. Daniel called it the Hollow. And it was so isolated that even the nearest neighbor was miles away. The air inside always felt heavy, like the house was holding its breath. Stories about the Hollow circulated at school. Whispers of a woman who had disappeared there decades ago and shadows that moved on their own. That night, Daniel and I were in his room, playing cards under the dim light of a single lamp. Outside, the wind howled faintly, but it wasn't enough to distract us until we heard a loud, echoing crash that made both of us freeze. "What was that?" I whispered, staring at the door. Daniel didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the hallway, his hand frozen mid-move. I don't know," he finally said. "Maybe Mrs. Thorne. She'd have said something," I replied, my voice trembling. That didn't sound normal. We sat in silence, listening. The house groaned under the weight of the wind, but there was something else, a faint scratching sound. Like nails dragging against wood. "We should check," Daniel said, standing up, though he didn't sound convinced. "Check what?" I hissed. "That crash came from upstairs. Your parents said we weren't supposed to." "It's probably nothing," he interrupted, grabbing the flashlight from his nightstand. "Come on, I'll go first." I followed reluctantly, clinging to the back of his shirt as we stepped into the hallway. The air felt colder out there, and every step seemed louder than it should have been. "Daniel," I whispered. "Do you feel that?" "Feel what?" "It's freezing," I said, rubbing my arms. "It wasn't this cold before." He nodded but didn't say anything. We reached the foot of the staircase, and the scratching noise stopped. For a moment, everything was eerily silent. Then we heard it again, a faint, melodic hum, like someone humming a lullaby. Mrs. Thorne?" Daniel called out, his voice wavering. No answer. "Let's just go back to your room," I pleaded. "This is stupid." But Daniel was already climbing the stairs, his flashlight beam bouncing off the cracked wallpaper. "If it's nothing, we'll just look and go back," he said, more to himself than to me. When we reached the landing, the cold hit us like a wall. The hum grew louder, and I grabbed Daniel's arm. "It's coming from the music room," I whispered. He nodded, his face pale. We moved down the hallway, each step echoing ominously. The door to the music room was ajar, and cold air seeped through the crack. "You open it," I said, my voice barely audible. "Fine," Daniel whispered, his hand trembling as he pushed the door open. The room was dark, except for the pale moonlight filtering through the broken shutters. The grand piano stood in the center, its keys exposed like jagged teeth. The source of the cold air seemed to be coming from the far wall, where an old, cracked mirror hung crookedly. "What the hell happened here?" Daniel muttered, stepping inside. I stayed by the door, my heart pounding. "We should leave. This isn't right." But Daniel was already moving toward the mirror. "Look at this," he said, pointing. "It's broken, but the cracks almost look like." "Don't touch it," I snapped, louder than I intended. "Why not?" he asked, turning back to me. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his fear. "I don't know. Just don't." Suddenly, a faint whisper filled the room. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably a woman's voice. "Help me." We both froze. "Did you hear that?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Of course I heard it," I said, backing toward the hallway. "Let's go." But Daniel didn't move. He was staring at the mirror, his face pale. "It's moving." "What's moving?" I demanded, not wanting to look. "The reflection," he said, his voice hollow. "It's not us." Against my better judgment, I stepped closer and glanced at the mirror. The reflection didn't match the room. Instead, it showed a shadowy figure standing in the corner, its form flickering like a dying flame. "Who's there?" Daniel called out, his voice cracking. "We're not afraid of you. Speak for yourself." I hissed, grabbing his arm. "We need to leave." The door behind us slammed shut, and the whispers turned into a low, guttural growl. The figure in the mirror moved closer, its hollow eyes staring directly at us. "Daniel!" I screamed, shaking him. "Open the door." He snapped out of his trance and lunged for the doorknob. It wouldn't budge. "What do you want?" he shouted, his voice breaking. The whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. Then, in a voice that sounded like it came from everywhere at once, it said, "Stay." "No!" I yelled, pounding on the door. "Let us out." The mirror shattered with a deafening crash, sending shards of glass flying across the room. The temperature dropped even further, and a shadow began to emerge from the broken glass, its form twisting and writhing. The door suddenly flew open, and we bolted down the hallway, nearly tripping over each other. We didn't stop running until we were outside in the snow, gasping for breath. Mrs. Thorne found us minutes later. "What's going on?" she demanded, her eyes darting toward the house. "The mirror, it broke, and there was something," Daniel stammered. Her face darkened, and she grabbed his arm. "You went into the music room, didn't you?" He nodded, trembling. "You shouldn't have," she whispered, her voice low and urgent. "That room is cursed. The mirror isn't just a mirror. It's a doorway." "To what?" I asked, my voice barely audible. She didn't answer, but her silence said enough. The next day, we left the hollow. Years later, Daniel told me he sometimes still dreams about that night, about the shadow in the mirror and the whispers that never stopped. As for me, I've done everything I can to forget, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I think I can still hear it. Stay. Story 3. The Lights Above. It was New Year's Eve, 2019. My family and I were spending the holidays in San Vigilio, Mexico, at an old villa we had inherited. The villa was isolated, surrounded by dense forest, and it always gave me an unsettling feeling, especially at night. The silence in the area felt alive, as though the forest itself was waiting for something. That evening, our neighbor, Señor Alvarez, invited us to a New Year's gathering at his sprawling, antiquated mansion. My parents were eager to go, hoping for some festive cheer. My sister, Anna, and I reluctantly followed. The mansion was dimly lit, with long shadows stretching across its stone walls. A fireplace crackled in the main hall, casting flickering light on the faces of the 20 or so guests. The atmosphere was tense, despite the polite smiles and small talk. "Welcome, friends," Señor Alvarez said, raising a glass. "Let us celebrate this night and leave behind the shadows of the past year." "Some shadows don't stay in the past," murmured an elderly woman seated by the fire. Her voice was barely audible, but the room fell silent for a moment. "Don't start with your tales, Luisa," snapped a younger man. "Let us enjoy the evening." Anna leaned toward me. What did she mean by that? I shrugged, though the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. As midnight approached, we gathered on the mansion's wide terrace to toast the new year. The view of the valley below was breathtaking, but my eyes kept drifting to the dark forest. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" said Anna, breaking my thoughts. "Yeah," I replied. "But there's something off." Suddenly, Anna stiffened. "Do you see that?" she whispered, pointing toward the trees. I followed her gaze. Faint lights shimmered above the treetops, barely visible at first. "What is it?" I asked. "Maybe fireflies?" suggested a man nearby, overhearing us. "Fireflies don't move like that," Anna muttered. The lights were weaving through the trees, forming erratic patterns. More appeared, their glow intensifying. "It's just some kind of natural phenomenon," my dad said, though his voice wavered. "It's them," Señora Alvarez suddenly whispered, clutching her husband's arm. "Who?" my mom asked sharply. "The Watchers," she said, her eyes wide with fear. "They always come this time of year." "Don't frighten the guests, Maria," Señor Alvarez interrupted, though his face was pale. "They need to know," she hissed. "They need to leave before it's too late." The lights were multiplying now, swirling faster. They pulsed rhythmically, almost hypnotically. "This happened before, didn't it?" Anna asked. "You've seen them?" Señor Alvarez hesitated before nodding. "Last year. And the year before. Each time, someone," he trailed off. "Someone what?" I pressed. "Disappears," he said finally, his voice barely audible. Panic rippled through the group. Some guests rushed back inside, while others stared, transfixed, at the lights. "We need to leave," my mom said, grabbing my dad's arm. "It's too late," Señora Alvarez whispered. "Once you've seen them, they've already seen you." The lights suddenly shifted, darting closer to the terrace. Gasps and screams erupted. "Inside!" Señor Alvarez shouted. "Everyone inside!" We stumbled back into the house, slamming the glass doors shut. The lights hovered just outside, pulsing like a heartbeat. "What do they want?" Anna demanded. "To choose," said Señora Alvarez, tears streaming down her face. "Choose what?" I asked. She didn't answer, but the elderly woman by the fire spoke up. A life. They take one every year. It's their way of reminding us we're not alone. This is insane, my dad yelled. We're leaving. As he reached for the door, the lights flared blindingly. The air vibrated with a low hum that seemed to penetrate my bones. You can't leave, said Señor Alvarez. Not until they're done. The lights began to move, flowing like liquid into the house through cracks and keyholes. People screamed and scattered. One by one, the lights enveloped the guests, who froze in place. Their faces contorted in silent terror. Anna grabbed my hand. We have to hide. We ran through the labyrinthine halls, the sound of the humming lights following us. We ducked into a storage room, locking the door behind us. What's happening? Anna whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, I admitted. But we need to stay quiet. The hum grew louder. The door began to glow. And then it disintegrated into ash. The lights flooded in, surrounding us. Why us? Anna cried. What do you want? A voice, cold and hollow, echoed in our minds. Balance. Take me. I shouted. Leave her alone. The lights paused, as if considering my offer. Then, they surged toward Anna. No. I screamed, but I couldn't move. Her eyes met mine, filled with fear and resignation. Run. She whispered, before the lights engulfed her. I woke up hours later, alone on the terrace. The house was silent, the guests gone. The only sign of the night's events was the faint glow of the lights, now fading into the horizon. I called for Anna, but there was no answer. I searched the house and the forest for days. But she was never found. Every New Year's Eve, I returned to that terrace, hoping to see her again. And every year, the lights return, waiting for their next choice. Story 4. The Letter in the Dark. The 1st of January marked another year without Clara. 18 years had passed since our daughter vanished into the unknown, leaving us with a hole that could never be filled. My wife, Elise, had retreated further into herself over the years, her grief a constant shadow in our home. Every New Year's Day brought it all back. Like the wound had just been made. This year was no exception. I was frying eggs when Elise shuffled into the kitchen, her hair unkempt and her eyes hollow. I'll be in her room, she muttered. As she did every year. The room, still frozen in time, held Clara's untouched toys, the bright pink wallpaper faded with years of silence. Okay, I replied. My voice barely audible over the sound of sizzling oil. As she disappeared up the stairs, I sighed and poured myself a cup of coffee. The house felt heavier than usual. That's when I heard the knock at the door. Strange. It was early, and we weren't expecting visitors. When I opened it, the cold January air hit me, but the street was empty. Only a small package sat on the porch, neatly wrapped in black paper with a crimson ribbon. There was no note, no address, just my name scrawled across it in shaky handwriting. What is it? Elisa's voice startled me from behind. She had come down silently, her presence as ghostly as Clara's absence. I don't know. Found it on the porch, I said, holding it up. Open it, she urged. Her voice suddenly sharp. Inside was an old cassette tape. No markings, no label. Just the tape. Elise and I exchanged glances, both of us uneasy. Do we still have that player? I asked. It's in the attic, she replied. Without another word, she went to retrieve it. When Elise returned, we sat in tense silence as the player clicked and whirred. At first, there was only static. Then, a voice emerged, faint, distorted, but unmistakable. It was Clara's voice. "Mommy? Daddy? Are you there?" Elise let out a choked sob, her hands trembling as she clutched mine. "How? How is this possible?" she whispered. The tape continued. "I miss you. It's dark here, but they say I can come back soon. They say you just need to remember." "Who are they?" Elise screamed at the player, as if the voice could answer her. "Please, Mommy. Please, Daddy. Come find me." The tape ended abruptly with a high-pitched screech that sent chills down my spine. We didn't sleep that night. Elise was inconsolable, rocking herself in Clara's old room while clutching the cassette. I stayed downstairs, staring at the package and the empty tape case. Questions swirled in my mind. Who had sent it? Was it a cruel joke? Or, could it really be Clara? At 3 a.m., another knock came at the door. This time, I grabbed the baseball bat from the closet before opening it. But again, no one was there. Just a single note pinned to the door. Behind the willow tree. I stared at the words. My heartbeat pounding in my ears. The willow tree stood at the edge of the woods behind our house. I hadn't been there in years. "We have to go," I told Elise, showing her the note. "No," she said firmly, her eyes wide with fear. "This is wrong. Someone is toying with us. What if it's her?" I challenged, the desperation in my voice matching her own. She hesitated before nodding. "Okay. But we go together." The walk to the willow tree was agonizingly slow. The frost-covered ground crunched beneath our boots, and the air was thick with an unnatural silence. When we reached the tree, we found a small wooden box buried in the snow at its base. I knelt to open it, my hands shaking. Inside was Clara's favorite teddy bear, matted with dirt, and another note. "Remember what you did." I froze, the words burning into my mind. "What does it mean?" Elise asked, her voice quivering. But I couldn't answer. Because deep down, I knew. As we stood there, a faint giggle echoed through the woods. "Did you hear that?" Elise whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Stay close to me," I said, gripping the baseball bat tighter. "Hello? Who's there?" I called out into the darkness. The giggle came again, closer this time. "Mommy? Daddy?" a voice called, faint and childlike. It sounded just like Clara. Elisa's grip on my arm tightened. "Clara? Is that you?" she cried, her voice cracking. "Come closer," the voice replied, its tone oddly flat. "I've been waiting for you." We turned toward the source of the voice. A small figure emerged from the shadows, holding a red balloon that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. "Clara?" Elise sobbed. Taking a step forward despite my protest. "Don't," I hissed, grabbing her arm. "That's not." The figure stepped closer, the balloon rising higher. The faint light revealed a face that was almost, but not quite, Clara's. The eyes were too large, the smile too wide, and the skin too pale. "Why did you leave me?" it whispered, tilting its head. "We didn't leave you. We searched everywhere." Elise cried, tears streaming down her face. The figure giggled again. "That's what you tell yourselves, isn't it? What are you?" I demanded. Stepping in front of Elise. "What do you want?" The smile grew wider, revealing jagged teeth that gleamed in the moonlight. "To remember," it said simply. "Remember what?" Elise screamed. The figure's head tilted further, almost unnaturally. "What you did," it whispered before vanishing into the darkness. We stumbled back to the house in silence. The events of the night etched into our minds. On the kitchen table lay another note we hadn't seen before. You're next. Story 5. The Last Flight. The plane hummed softly as it glided through the endless night sky. Emma, a curious 7-year-old, sat by the window, her chin resting on her hand. Her older brother, Liam, was engrossed in a video game on his tablet. Emma felt bored. She kicked the back of Liam's seat lightly. "Emma, stop it!" Liam snapped, turning around to glare at her. "Why are you so boring?" Emma retorted, crossing her arms. Their dad, sitting beside Emma, looked up from his book and gave her a gentle tap on the arm. "Behave, Emma. Look outside or something." Emma sighed dramatically and turned to the small airplane window. The stars outside twinkled against the dark canvas of the sky. She pressed her forehead to the cool glass, wondering how long this flight would last. Suddenly, the plane lights flickered. It wasn't unusual, but this time, they didn't turn back on. The cabin was plunged into darkness. Gasps rippled through the passengers. "Dad?" Emma whispered, tugging at his sleeve. "It's probably just a minor issue." "Nothing to worry about," Dad said, though his voice wavered slightly. A moment later, every seatback screen flickered on, casting a pale blue glow across the cabin. Emma's screen lit up with a static-filled image. Before she could make sense of it, the image switched to a man in a dark suit standing in front of a red curtain. His face was partially obscured, as if shadows clung unnaturally to him. "Good evening," the man said. His voice smooth yet unnervingly cold. "If you're watching this, you've already made your final journey." Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. A baby began crying somewhere toward the back. "What does he mean, Dad?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dad didn't answer. He was staring at the screen, his face pale. The man continued. "You've entered the liminal space between worlds. The flight you thought you were on does not exist. There is no destination. There is no return." The plane suddenly shook, jolting everyone in their seats. Screams filled the cabin as oxygen masks dropped from above. The man's voice cut through the chaos. "You have two choices: stay seated and accept your fate, or attempt to escape and face the consequences. Either way, your time is limited." Liam grabbed Emma's hand, his usual calm demeanor replaced with fear. "Emma, this isn't normal. Something's really wrong." The plane shook again, harder this time. Emma pressed her face to the window, desperate for something familiar. What she saw made her stomach churn. Outside, the stars were gone, replaced by an infinite black void. Tendrils of shadow writhed against the plane's wings, as if trying to pull it apart. "Dad! Look!" Emma cried, pointing. Dad followed her gaze and froze. His voice cracked as he muttered, This isn't real. It can't be." The cabin was in chaos. Some passengers screamed, while others frantically tried to open the emergency exits. But the doors wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the man on the screen spoke again. "Time is up." The screens went black. Then, the plane fell silent. The passengers stopped moving, their screams cut off mid-cry. Emma turned to her dad, but he sat motionless, his eyes glazed over as if in a trance. "Dad?" Emma shook him. But he didn't respond. She looked around, everyone else was frozen too, their faces twisted in expressions of terror or disbelief. "Liam?" Emma whimpered. "I'm here," Liam said, his voice trembling. "What's happening?" Before Emma could answer, the plane's walls began to dissolve into the void outside. Piece by piece, the cabin faded away, leaving Emma and Liam suspended in the darkness. "Emma! Liam whispered, his voice barely audible. Do you hear that? A faint sound, like distant whispers, filled the void. The shadows around them moved closer, curling like smoke. A voice emerged from the whispers, soft and melodic yet utterly chilling. You shouldn't have looked out the window, it said. Emma's breath hitched. What do you mean? Who are you? The voice chuckled, the sound echoing in the empty space. You've always been curious, haven't you, little one? Now, you'll see what lies beyond. The shadows enveloped them completely. Emma tried to scream, but no sound came out. When she opened her eyes, she was back in her seat, the plane cabin bright and bustling. The other passengers were chatting and laughing as if nothing had happened. Emma turned to Liam, but he wasn't there. Liam, she called, her voice shaking. Her dad looked at her, confused. Who's Liam? Emma's blood ran cold. She looked around the cabin, searching for her brother. But his seat was empty, and no one seemed to remember he ever existed. The flight attendant approached with a warm smile. Is everything all right, miss? Emma stared at her, tears welling in her eyes. What happened to Liam? The flight attendant tilted her head, her smile never wavering. I'm sorry, dear. There's no one by that name on this flight. Emma looked out the window again, her reflection staring back at her. But behind her reflection, she saw him, the man in the suit, smiling from the shadows. Ending ambiguity. Was it all a dream? Or had Emma glimpsed something far beyond human comprehension? As the plane soared through the sky, the faint sound of whispers lingered, growing louder, waiting for the right moment to return. Story 4. The Whisperer's Game. It was New Year's Eve, and the snow blanketed the woods around Mia's parents' cabin. The four of us, Mia, Ethan, Lily, and I, sat around the fireplace, enjoying the warmth while the wind howled outside. It was quiet, far too quiet for comfort. Around 9:15 p.m., Mia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and frowned. What is it? Ethan asked, leaning over. It's a text, Mia replied. I'm at the door. We exchanged puzzled looks. From who? Lily asked. No idea. Mia stood, clutching her phone. It's probably nothing. I'll check. She returned a minute later, visibly uneasy. There's no one there. Let me see, Ethan said, grabbing his coat. No, don't, Mia interrupted. It's probably just some prank. We all agreed to ignore it, but 15 minutes later, Lily's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face went pale. What does it say? I asked. It's the same number, she whispered, showing us the screen. I see you. She spun around, scanning the room. All right, who's messing with me? Not funny. Mia and I didn't do anything, Ethan said defensively. What about you, Alex? I shook my head. Why would I? This is creeping me out too. Ethan pulled out his phone. I'm texting them. His fingers tapped quickly as he muttered, Who is this? The reply came almost immediately, You'll see soon. What the hell? Ethan muttered. Okay, that's just weird. At 10:30, my phone buzzed. I hesitated before looking at it. The forest remembers, I read aloud. What does that even mean? Mia asked, her voice trembling. It's not funny anymore, Lily snapped. Whoever it is needs to stop. Ethan stood abruptly. All right, enough. I'm going outside to see if someone's messing with us. Don't. Mia shouted, grabbing his arm. What if it's... I don't know, dangerous? Ethan shook her off. It's just some idiot trying to scare us. He stepped out onto the porch with a flashlight. We watched through the window as he scanned the area. A shadow darted between the trees. Ethan froze. "Did you see that?" he asked when he returned, his voice low. "See what?" Mia asked, shutting the door behind him. "There was something moving out there," Ethan said. "And I found this." He held up a small, rusted key. "Where did you find that?" I asked, staring at it. "It was lying in the snow, right where I saw the shadow," he replied. "Nope," Lily said, standing up. "I'm not staying here another second. Let's go." Before we could respond, all our phones buzzed simultaneously. The messages read, "Don't forget the key. The game isn't over." "What game?" Mia whispered, her voice cracking. We rushed to Ethan's car and piled in. The tires crunched over the snow as he started the engine. As we drove down the winding road, Ethan's dashboard lit up with a message, "Wrong turn." "What the hell?" Ethan muttered, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" Lily asked, her voice rising. "Keep driving," I said, trying to steady my voice. The road seemed endless, the same trees passing over and over. Panic set in as a thick fog rolled in, obscuring everything ahead. "This can't be real," Ethan muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. Finally, the faint glow of a cabin appeared ahead. Relieved, we stopped, hoping for help. "Let me do the talking," Ethan said as he got out. We followed him hesitantly. The cabin door creaked open before we could knock. A voice drifted out, raspy and low, "You brought the key?" Ethan stepped back. "Who are you?" he demanded. The voice laughed, guttural and hollow. "You already know. Come in." "No way," Lily whispered, backing away. "Let's leave." Ethan clutched the rusted key tightly. "What happens if we don't?" The voice was silent for a moment before answering, "Then the forest takes what it's owed." "What does that mean?" Mia cried. The door slammed shut. And the cabin's lights flickered out. Our phones buzzed again. The messages read, "Run. We need to get out of here," I said, pulling Ethan back toward the car. The engine refused to start. The shadows in the woods began to shift, moving closer. We could hear faint whispers, growing louder, echoing through the trees. "What are they saying?" Mia asked, her voice barely audible. "They're calling our names," Lily replied, her face pale. The whispers grew into a deafening roar as we huddled in the car, too terrified to move. The last message on my phone glowed in the dark, "You brought it with you. It's too late." The screen went black, and everything was silent. Story 7. The Shadows of Oldsmar. It was New Year's Eve, and the streets of Oldsmar shimmered with fireworks. Yet at 121 Willow Lane, the Gomez family home was unnervingly silent. Mario Gomez paced the living room, unease gnawing at him. Upstairs, his brother Christian and their mother Lucia had been arguing for hours. The argument had started over something trivial, moving a set of heavy, locked trunks to the attic. But the tension in Christian's voice and the unsettling look in his eyes earlier were anything but trivial. Mario hesitated before ascending the creaking staircase. "Christian? Mom?" he called out softly. No response. The air grew colder as he approached the attic door. Suddenly, a sharp thud broke the silence, followed by what sounded like low, guttural muttering. Mario's heart pounded as he swung the door open. The attic was dimly lit, and the single bulb flickered erratically. A coppery smell hung heavy in the air. "Mom? Christian? What's going?" Mario froze mid-sentence. In the corner, Christian stood hunched over, gripping a blood-stained axe. Lucia's lifeless body lay crumpled at his feet, her head missing. "What have you done?" Mario shouted, his voice trembling. Christian slowly turned, his face pale and his eyes hollow. He looked almost empty. "She wouldn't stop," Christian whispered. His voice barely audible. "What? Stop what?" Mario demanded, his gaze darting between the axe and the blood pooling on the floor. "The voices," Christian replied. "They told her. Told her I had to leave. That I didn't belong." Mario backed away slowly, fumbling for his phone. "You've lost it. This isn't you, Christian. Let me help you." "They won't let you help me." Christian interrupted, his voice rising. "You think this was my choice?" They've been whispering to her for days. They wouldn't stop until I had to. "Christian, you're not making sense. There are no voices. This is insane." Mario stammered, dialing 911. Christian laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down Mario's spine. "You don't hear them, do you?" "Hear what?" Christian's expression darkened. He pointed at the trunks in the corner. "Them. They're in there. They came 2 nights ago. Mom wouldn't tell me where they came from. She just said we had to keep them locked." Mario glanced at the trunks. They were old, covered in strange carvings, and radiated an almost imperceptible hum. "Christian, you're not well." "This is just," Mario trailed off as he heard it, a faint whisper, like wind sneaking through a crack. "Do you hear it now?" Christian asked, a manic grin spreading across his face. Mario shook his head. "No, it's just the wind." Christian stepped closer, still holding the axe. "It's not the wind, Mario. They've been talking to me. Telling me things. They said I wasn't supposed to be here. They said Mom knew. She's been lying to us our whole lives." "What are you talking about?" "Mom loved us." "You're not thinking straight." Mario snapped. Inching toward the stairs. Christian's grip tightened on the axe. "You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to hurt her?" His voice cracked, tears streaming down his face. "They said she would kill me if I didn't stop her first." Mario's mind raced. "Christian, put the axe down. We can figure this out, but you have to let me help you." "You don't get it." Christian screamed. "It's too late. They're already here." Suddenly, the whispers grew louder. Mario turned toward the trunks, and for a fleeting moment, he saw shadows writhing beneath the lids. "What the hell?" Mario whispered, stepping back. Christian's manic grin returned. "Now you see. Now you understand." Before Mario could respond, Christian dropped the axe and bolted past him, disappearing down the stairs. "Christian! Stop!" Mario yelled, but his brother was gone. Mario hesitated, his eyes fixed on the trunks. The whispers grew louder, almost chanting now. He approached cautiously, his hand trembling as he reached for the lid of the nearest trunk. "Don't!" Mario spun around. A voice, faint and desperate. It sounded like his mother's. "Mom?" He whispered, his throat tightening. But Lucia's lifeless body still lay on the floor, unmoving. The whispers turned to laughter. And the attic light flickered violently before plunging the room into darkness. Mario staggered back, panic overtaking him. He stumbled down the stairs and out of the house, where flashing police lights greeted him. When the deputies entered the home, they found Lucia's body and her severed head stuffed inside one of the trunks. But the other trunks were empty, completely void of the artifacts Mario swore he'd seen. Christian was found hours later, wandering the woods, muttering about the Watchers and the deal. He was taken into custody, but his story only grew more incoherent. Weeks later, Christian vanished from his cell. The only clue he left behind was a chilling message scrawled in blood on the wall. "They are coming for me next. Then for you." The trunks, sealed and hidden by authorities, were never seen again. But those who enter the abandoned house on Willow Lane claim they can still hear whispers, and sometimes, faint laughter. Story 8. The Crimson Veil. The Drake Hotel, with its grand chandeliers and whispers of old-world luxury, was the centerpiece of Chicago's elite gatherings in the 1920s. On New Year's Eve, the air crackled with excitement as guests adorned in glittering finery spilled into the opulent ballroom. Among them was a woman named Eleanor, her silk crimson gown flowing like liquid fire. But Eleanor wasn't just another partygoer, she was the fiancée of Victor Alden, a rising steel magnate. The night was Eleanor's introduction to Victor's circle, a proving ground for her charm and sophistication. Yet, as the clock approached midnight, Eleanor began to feel a growing unease. She caught fleeting glances exchanged between Victor and a woman in an emerald dress, a stranger she didn't recognize. Their shared smiles seemed too familiar, their whispers too intimate. "Victor?" Eleanor asked with a forced smile as she led him toward the grand staircase. "Who is she?" Victor's laugh was light, but his eyes darted away. "No one important, my dear. Just a client." Eleanor's grip on his arm tightened. "Then why does she look at you as if she knows every secret you've ever kept?" Victor sighed, a shadow crossing his face. "Eleanor. Tonight is not the time for suspicion. Let's enjoy ourselves." But Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling. Later, she followed Victor, slipping through the guests unnoticed, her crimson dress blending with the crowd. She found him in a secluded hallway, speaking in hushed tones to the woman in emerald. The confrontation was swift. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. "How dare you, Victor?" The woman in emerald recoiled, but Victor raised his hands in mock innocence. "Eleanor. You've misunderstood." Eleanor's eyes burned with fury. "Misunderstood? You betray me and expect me to believe it's a misunderstanding?" The woman in emerald interjected, her voice cool and cutting. "Perhaps you should ask yourself why he's here with me instead of you." Eleanor's glare shifted to her. "And who are you to interfere? Do you think you're anything more than a passing indulgence?" Victor stepped between them. "Enough, both of you. This is neither the time nor the place." Eleanor's voice dropped, trembling with emotion. "You promised me, Victor. You promised me a life together. Was it all a lie?" Victor hesitated, guilt flickering across his face. "Eleanor, I never meant to hurt you." Eleanor's breath hitched, her voice barely a whisper. "But you did." Before Victor could respond, Eleanor turned and fled, her heels echoing through the marble corridor. She ran past startled guests, past the ballroom, and up the grand staircase, tears blurring her vision. She didn't stop until she reached the rooftop. The city stretched out before her, a sea of glittering lights against the dark. The icy wind bit at her skin. But Eleanor felt nothing but despair. She gripped the ledge, her breath coming in ragged sobs. "Eleanor, wait." Victor's voice called from behind her. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "You've taken everything from me, Victor. My trust, my dignity. What is left?" Victor stepped closer, his hands outstretched. "Come down from there. We can fix this." Eleanor's laugh was hollow. "Fix this? Some wounds don't heal." Victor's voice broke, desperation creeping in. "Please, Eleanor. I made a mistake, but I love you. I'll do anything to make it right." Eleanor's expression softened for a moment, but then her eyes hardened. "Love? If this is love, then I'd rather be free of it." And with that, she let go. The party ended in chaos. Eleanor's body was found in the alley below, her crimson dress a stark contrast against the cold pavement. The tragedy made headlines. But the whispers surrounding her death grew darker as the years passed. Guests began reporting strange occurrences. On cold winter nights, a woman in a crimson dress was seen wandering the hallways, her footsteps echoing long after she vanished. Some claimed to hear her voice, faint and mournful, calling Victor's name. Others swore they felt a cold hand brush against them near the rooftop. One evening, decades later, a new guest named Clara checked into the hotel. Intrigued by the rumors, she decided to explore. As she walked the 10th floor, she felt the air grow colder. She turned a corner and froze. There, standing at the end of the hallway, was a woman in a crimson dress. "Excuse me," Clara called out, her voice trembling. "Are you lost?" The woman turned slowly. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. "Have you seen Victor?" she whispered. Clara stumbled back, her heart pounding. "No. I don't know who that is." The woman took a step closer. Her bare feet silent against the carpet. "He promised he'd find me. But he never came." Clara shook her head, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. I don't know anything about him." The woman's expression twisted into something between sorrow and rage. "Then why are you here? Why do you walk these halls where only the lost linger?" Clara's breath hitched. I was curious. I heard the stories." The woman's laugh was cold, almost mocking. "Curiosity. It's what brings them all. And yet none stay to help. They all run." Clara turned to run but felt a hand grip her shoulder. She screamed and spun around, but the hallway was empty. The only sound was the faint echo of a laugh, fading into silence. Clara checked out the next morning, shaken but alive. She told the staff about her encounter, but they merely exchanged knowing looks. The woman in crimson, one of them murmured. "She's been waiting for Victor for a long time." Clara's curiosity got the better of her. Before leaving, she asked the concierge one final question: who was Victor? The concierge hesitated. "There was no Victor," he said finally. "At least, not in any of the records. Just her." Clara's blood ran cold. If Victor didn't exist, then who was Eleanor searching for? And why did she believe he'd return? The question lingered, unanswered, as Clara left the Drake Hotel, never to return. Behind her, in the shadows of the 10th floor, a woman in crimson watched. Waiting for the man who had abandoned her, or perhaps, the truth she could never escape. Story 9. The Masked Intruder. It was a cold New Year's Eve in Vestavia Hills, Alabama. The streets were unusually quiet, save for the occasional echo of fireworks cracking in the distance. Danielle and Bart Yancey had settled into their living room with glasses of champagne, their security system quietly humming in the background. They had no idea that their night was about to take a chilling turn. At 11:57 p.m., a faint chime alerted Danielle to motion on their driveway. "Probably just a raccoon again," she said with a shrug. Bart, curious, opened the app to check the security feed. His casual demeanor instantly stiffened. "Danny, come here," Bart whispered, his voice tight with unease. Danielle joined him and peered at the screen. A tall, gaunt figure stood just outside their garage. He was completely nude, except for a grotesque grinning mask of Ronald Reagan and a dirty white scarf draped awkwardly around his neck. He moved with deliberate slowness, tilting his head as if listening for something. "What the hell?" Danielle gasped. Bart grabbed his phone to call 911 but stopped when the figure suddenly turned to face the camera. The distorted mask seemed to stare straight through the lens. Then The man raised a single finger to his lips in a shushing gesture before disappearing out of frame. By the time the police arrived, the masked intruder was gone. 2 officers, Detective Harris and Officer Lane, searched the property with flashlights, their breath visible in the frosty air. "Are you sure you didn't recognize him? Maybe a neighbor playing a prank?" asked Detective Harris, his tone skeptical but professional. "Absolutely not," Bart said firmly. "We've lived here for 10 years. No one around here would do this. He's still out there," Danielle murmured, glancing nervously toward the dark woods behind their house. "I can feel it." Officer Lane's radio crackled to life. "Dispatch, we've received another call. A resident on Birchwood Drive reported seeing a man in a Reagan mask standing in their backyard. He's gone now, but there's blood smeared on their sliding glass door." The officers exchanged a tense glance. As the night wore on, more calls came in from neighboring streets. The descriptions were eerily similar: a man in a presidential mask, always watching, always vanishing before he could be caught. Some reports included chilling details: a faint knock on a bedroom window, an unsettling laugh echoing through the trees. By 3 a.m., the police had established a perimeter around the area, but the intruder remained elusive. Meanwhile, the Yanceys tried to get some sleep but found themselves huddled together in their bedroom. The security monitor perched on Bart's lap like a lifeline. At 3:33 a.m., the motion sensor chimed again. Bart's hands trembled as he brought up the feed. The masked man was back. Standing in the exact same spot as before, his head cocked to one side. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a child, no older than 10. Wearing a tattered party hat and holding a balloon shaped like a rabbit. The child's eyes were wide, glassy, and devoid of life. Danielle screamed. "What is that? What? Who is that?" Bart muttered. "No way. No way this is happening." His hands fumbled with the phone. "I'm calling them again." The man in the mask slowly lifted his hand and pointed directly at the camera. "He's taunting us," Danielle whispered. Her voice broke into a sob. "Why is he pointing? Bart, what does he want?" "Stay calm," Bart replied, his voice shaking. "The cops are coming. They'll get him this time." "Will they?" Danielle shot back, clutching his arm. "They didn't the first time. What if he gets in?" The feed flickered, and the camera went dark. The room fell into a suffocating silence. "Check the windows," Bart ordered, grabbing a flashlight. "I'll check the front door." Danielle hesitated. "No, don't split up. Stay here, please." "What if?" Her words were cut short by a soft knock. It came from the kitchen window. They froze. Bart tightened his grip on the flashlight and crept toward the sound. Danielle followed, her breath hitching with every step. As they reached the window, the knock came again, louder this time. Bart pulled back the curtain in a swift motion. Nothing. Just their empty backyard, illuminated by the pale glow of the porch light. Danielle exhaled shakily. "He's playing with us. Or someone else is," Bart muttered, closing the curtain. "No, it's him," Danielle insisted. "I know it is. He wants us scared." Before Bart could respond, a laugh, low, guttural, and echoing, drifted through the air. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the baby monitor in the hallway. Danielle's knees buckled, and Bart barely caught her. "It's not possible," she choked out. "We don't even have kids. Why is that on?" Bart grabbed the monitor, his hands trembling. Static crackled before a voice broke through, soft and sing-song. "He sees you. He'll come back when you're alone." By the time the police arrived again, there was no sign of the man or the child. However, the officers discovered a small stuffed rabbit on the driveway. Its fur matted with something dark and sticky. Detective Harris bagged it as evidence, his expression grim. "We'll increase patrols in the area," he assured the Yanceys. "But if you see anything else, call us immediately." After the police left, Danielle and Bart stayed awake until dawn, jumping at every creak and shadow. They never saw the masked man again. But strange things continued to happen in the neighborhood. Doors found ajar in the mornings, footprints leading to and from windows, and once, a single balloon floating down the street with no one in sight. Months later, the case was quietly closed, labeled as a series of pranks by an unknown perpetrator. But Danielle couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. One night, as she scrolled through her phone in bed, she received a notification, "Motion detected, driveway." Her heart raced as she opened the app. The screen was black, but faint audio crackled through the speakers. A child's voice, soft and sing-song, whispered, "He'll come back when you're alone." Story 10. The Whispering Shadows. It was New Year's Eve, and 5 friends, Lily, Jake, Mia, Ben, and Sam, decided to camp deep in the woods. The clearing was remote, surrounded by dense trees that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. A small fire crackled as they laughed, the warm glow casting flickering shadows. "Best idea ever, guys," Jake said, toasting his marshmallow over the fire. "Out here, no noise, no people. Just us and nature." "Nature and wolves," Ben added with a grin. Mia nudged him. "Very funny. Can we not start with the creepy stuff already?" Ben smirked. "Come on, Mia, it's just a joke." Lily shook her head. "Let's not. Remember the stories about this place? People claim they've heard weird things here." "Stories are just stories," Sam said, though he glanced uneasily at the dark forest beyond the firelight. "We'll be fine." They carried on, joking and sharing memories, when suddenly, Mia froze. "Shoo! Did you hear that?" The group fell silent. In the distance, faint and almost imperceptible, came a sound, a low whisper. "Probably the wind," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," Mia insisted, her eyes wide. "It wasn't the wind. It sounded like words." The group exchanged uneasy glances. Jake stood, grabbing the flashlight. "I'll check it out." "Don't be an idiot," Sam said, grabbing Jake's arm. "What if it's an animal? Or worse, some psycho? Then better we know, right?" Jake said, his bravado faltering slightly. Mia tugged her jacket tighter around herself. "Let's just stay together. Whatever it is, it can't hurt us if we're all here." The whispering stopped. For a moment, silence enveloped the group. Then, from the darkness, came a single, chilling word, "Go." "Did you hear that?" Lily whispered, her face pale. "Yeah," Ben said, his voice shaky. "I heard it. That wasn't just me, right?" Jake shined the flashlight into the trees, the beam cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" he called out. "Who's there?" No answer came. But the oppressive silence was broken by the sound of footsteps, circling their camp. "Stay close," Jake said, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. "Who's out there?" Sam shouted, his voice cracking. "This isn't funny." The footsteps stopped. Then, the whispering began again, louder and more urgent. This time, it wasn't one voice, it was many, overlapping and incomprehensible. Mia clung to Lily. "We need to leave. Now." "Not yet," Jake said, though he was visibly shaken. let's figure out what it is first. Figure out what? Ben snapped. It's not human. Nothing human sounds like that. A low, guttural laugh echoed from the woods, freezing them in place. It was closer now, just beyond the edge of the clearing. Jake's flashlight flickered. Great. Perfect timing, he muttered. Shut up, Jake, Lily hissed. What do we do? The group huddled closer as the laugh turned into a chant, a series of harsh, unnatural syllables that sent chills down their spines. What are they saying? Mia whispered, tears streaming down her face. Nothing good, Sam replied grimly. Let's grab our stuff and get out. As they began to pack in frantic silence, the chanting stopped. The forest fell deathly quiet, as though holding its breath. Then, a voice came from behind them, clear and close, stay. They turned as one, but there was nothing there. I'm not staying, Mia said, her voice trembling. I don't care if I have to run through the woods barefoot. I'm leaving. Wait, Jake said, his grip on the flashlight tightening. We stick together. No one goes alone. Another laugh rang out, this time from the opposite direction. We're surrounded, Sam muttered. Jake grabbed his knife. Okay, everyone, just keep calm. We move slowly, back toward the road. No sudden movements. They began to inch away from the clearing, their eyes darting around for any sign of movement. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows deeper and more menacing. The whispering resumed, louder than before, growing into a cacophony. Suddenly, the flashlight beam caught something, a figure, tall and gaunt, with eyes that reflected the light like a predator's. It stood motionless, watching them. Oh my God, Mia gasped. What is that? The figure took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. The whispering voices now seemed to come from it, spilling out in a grotesque harmony. Run! Jake yelled, and the group bolted, abandoning their gear. Branches clawed at their clothes as they sprinted through the forest. The whispers followed, growing louder, accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps. When they reached the road, they didn't stop until they were inside the car, slamming the doors shut. Jake fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. And the engine roared to life. As they sped away, the whispers faded. But just as they began to breathe a sigh of relief, Lily's phone buzzed. Who's texting you now? Sam asked. Lily's face turned pale as she stared at the screen. Slowly, she read the message aloud, "We let you go, for now." The group sat in stunned silence, the woods disappearing in the rearview mirror. No one spoke the rest of the drive home, but each of them knew they'd never return to that forest again.